Good morning, beautiful people of the internet, and welcome once more to the Sunday special live. And don't worry, we can see she's not here, but Helen will be joining us in about half an hour. We do also, and by no less means, have Adam G. Lawrence with us, Piotr, Rusinek, and of course myself, Jay Howard. And we'll be talking everything, probably everything, that Adam did in his Sunday supplement. What was the word count this week, Adam?
Just 4,600, Chief. Just 4,600.
Barely worth posting it under 5,000, isn't it? I mean,
I was disappointed in myself. I've let myself down. I've let my family down. You know how it goes, mate. You know how it is. Disappointing. But I mean, there was a bit more I could have said, really. But I didn't want to do any particular speculation. I know people tend to try and do a bit of speculation when there's a budget coming up or something like that. But I think we all understand the sort of reality of the mechanics of the wheels of politics these days, whereby realistically, everything that anybody fancies gets floated. That's something that the Johnson administration has really brought in a big way. The strategic leak, if you like, or the tactical leak. Obviously, it's the more populist you are, the more you want to try and use that. Obviously, Labour are doing a bit of that as well at the moment, and leaking a few bits to see how the temperature goes down. And actually, there was an interesting article I shared this week that Jeremy Hunt was considering abolishing the non-dom status to kind of steal a march on Labour. So he really is putting the poison pills into play and trying his best he's doing his best job to try and stay as Chancellor of the Exchequer, which, fair play to him. That's what you'd expect someone who's got the sort of level of tenacity he's had to show to build an 8-figure business doing. So I've come to like him a hell of a lot more than I did when he was the health secretary. I'll tell you that much for free. But I haven't spent a lot of time speculating on what might happen in the budget. I'd rather just deal with what comes up and then we'll see how we react to it. We always know as well, it's an opportunity for a lot of high-level statements and this, that, and the other, and the devil's in the detail, which is never released on the same day as the budget. But we also know whatever happens next week, there's going to be a dramatic need for it to be implemented like yesterday, because it's at the latest going to be implemented for this coming 24-25 tax year, because they need what they do to have some impact and to make an effect so they can try and win the election. Of course they do, so we're going to see, we'll get, I'm sure, a rabble-rousing speech of strength and dignity and all these wonderful British values. What will the detail look like? Don't really know. And so we'll leave that for next week to chat, I think. So I focused this week on, I had the old tinfoil hat on when I said there were basically two finalist candidates for the deputy governor of the Bank of England, because Ben Broadbent, who is the longest serving member of the committee at the moment by some way, is stepping down in July, and his successor has been appointed. And I said last week there were two choices. One who works for Jeremy Hunt at the moment and is inside the Treasury, and one who's done 6 years on the Monetary Policy Committee, more experience as a central banker. So the safe pair of hands versus the Chancellor's mole, I kind of framed it as, really. And surprisingly, given that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister make that appointment, the Chancellor's mole has won. Who would have thought it? So Claire Lombardelli joins the committee in July, and I'm having 50p on she votes to cut rates every single time she gets a chance to. That's me being a bit of an old cynic there, but I reckon that might be in the best interest of the people who've put her in the job. So that's the way. And of course, she's highly likely to last longer than this existing Conservative administration, so she might change her mind as and when, if power does indeed change hands. But there we go. The bank also do a monthly report on money and credit in general. So normally what people are trying to draw out of this report is the mortgage lending figures. So it's a pretty typical sort of story at the moment. They're going the right way. We had 55,000 mortgage approvals in the month of January. That's up from 52,000, and we were languishing under 50k. 12 months ago, Feb 23 was about the nadir of the full impact of the Liz Truss situation, and we were down under about 40,000 mortgage approvals. So this all kind of sounds good, but as usual, it's lacking context. And the context is that in a healthy market, healthy-ish market, which I characterise as sort of 2016 to 2019, really before lots of stimulus being pumped in and all the rest of it, you were looking at about 65 to 70,000 mortgage approvals every month. There was a month in 2021 where we had about 110,000 mortgage approvals. That's when you'd be starting to say, hold on, this looks like it might be bubble territory. And of course, interest rates were super, super low back then as well. So you had everything going for it, all the stimulus, all the cheap credit, the whole lot.
So basically that means that about 20,000 people that would normally apply for mortgages are now probably renting or staying in HMOs or staying with their parents, right?
I think that's fair to say, because these are sort of new mortgage applications. They're not remortgage applications. So there is an ability to draw that direct comparable, Piotr, absolutely. And that, of course, you're right, but also that's been backing up and backing up and backing up since October 2022, perhaps unsurprisingly. So this all builds this kind of avalanche. So I also talked in some detail about the Zoopla house price index report that they release in a very timely fashion at the end of the month for February. And they were talking about 15% more sold subject to contracts in February compared to February 23. So that's a bit more of a healthy market. But there's 21% more stock on the market. Now, there's only 10% more coming onto the market. So there's less coming on than is getting sold subject to contracts at the moment. That should all play out. But there's been that backup that's built up over the last 12 to 18 months of there just being more and more stock. But again, we came from a place where there really wasn't enough stock. So the transaction volumes and the numbers and what's going on is starting to look a little bit like 2019. And unless we have a dramatic shift in the way that there's going to be something that dramatically changes the course of the housing market this year, like, for example, a big drop in the interest rate suddenly. Yeah, a bigger drop than people like me are expecting, where we're kind of thinking a couple of cuts, a natural tail on the bond yields down from 4% down to 3.5%, which is going to lead to, you know, us coming roughly back to where we started this year in terms of very optimistic mortgage pricing. That's where we should end up at the end of the year, right? All else being equal. Transaction volumes will look similar to 2019. The difference with 2019 and now is inflation. And there's inflation and wage inflation, because people are still going to be gaining traction in terms of what they can afford. And this is the big, you know, we have all these debates all the time, and I seem to just moan and moan more and more as I get older. I'm afraid to apologize to everybody, but everybody talks about the wrong stuff. Like the 99% mortgages is addressing this problem with deposits that people have. But the deposit problem seems to be a bit of an all or nothing problem. The average deposit for a mortgage is 20%, right? So it's not that people can't get a 95% mortgage, they must have a 99% one. That's a few fractional cases at the margin in the tail of the distribution, right? The problem is they can't pass the credit scoring. And this is what people are not, this is a very typical, I'm afraid to say, usually plays itself out on the left hand side of the political argument. But the problem is what we did before 2008 is that we lent completely irresponsibly, but there was an element of, if we were in today's world, that could have been framed as we were empowering people, we were doing all this wonderful stuff for people by lending them money that they couldn't afford, that one day was going to blow up in their face, right? And it did blow up in their face in 2008 and 9, and millions of people lost their homes, as you know, right? Now, what then happened is the regulator stepped in and was told this must never happen again. Yeah. So what they did was they wrote some regulations that were quite tight, and that tightened up the affordability criteria and who they could lend to and how much they could lend. Then by tightening up the affordability criteria, by definition, people who are getting lower paid are going to have less chance to get onto the housing ladder, right? That's mathematically the case. There's no argument in that at all. So then 10 years later, when you look back and go, oh, it's difficult for first time buyers these days. Well, it is, unless they're getting paid a lot of money, right? And just getting paid a lot of money doesn't guarantee you the ability to get a mortgage, because if you can't manage that money, then that will also get picked up in the relatively strict underwriting criteria there are these days. But nobody can really turn around and say, well, actually, the underwriting's a problem, because the underwriting's probably about right. Yeah, it's probably about right. So in many ways, the Conservatives could try and argue, well, we've tried to address this by pushing the minimum wage up, whereas really their political reasons for pushing the minimum wage up are probably, we'd rather that companies paid for the lower paid, rather than us having to subsidise them through tax credits, which, if you don't know, is a big thing at the moment, because tax credits are being phased into universal credit. And what does that do? Well, interestingly, it stops people who have an element of savings or any wealth at all from claiming UC in the same way they claim tax credits. Because if they've got X in the bank, 6,000 or whatever it is, they're going to come under that blanket universal credit rule. And therefore, they're going to have to draw down their assets or save their assets. So it's going to be a big saving. And I haven't seen any analysis of this. And probably because on the left, people aren't going to want to praise the government for improving the benefit system if benefits are going to people that they shouldn't be going to. But you would think on the right, the incumbents would be keen to say, look, we're making an improvement here with universal credit. I think probably everyone's just worried because implementation of universal credit has been particularly difficult over the period since which it was first conceptualized and piloted in the West Midlands. So Zoopla House Price Report has started to say they don't see prices going up, but they've softened their language on them going down. But they see transaction volume going up to about 1.1 million, but they don't think prices will go up. I still think they're wrong on that front, because I think what they're missing out is that wage inflation and that affordability metric. I saw an article shared by Fortune the other day that was saying the millennials are about to get the biggest inheritance ever as the generations above them play out and shuffle off their mortal coils, and people just laughing left, right and centre. But the thing is, what you can't do is say that the boomers have got all the money and then deny that that money will be passed down to future generations when they pass away. It's, again, obviously it's inherently true. And I mentioned a couple of weeks ago about as a Gen Xer, you know, we were all told in the 90s and the 2000s that we were lazy, we were rubbish, we were this, we were that, and then went on to be a generation that pulled up some trees, really, when it came to the job market and work and all the rest of it. And there's absolutely no reason why the millennials and then the Gen Zers behind them won't be the same. There's no reason why they won't be the same. It's more bias, and also ways of working change, and that changes outcomes ultimately at the end of the day. But so went through Zoopla report, which is effectively saying more volume, prices stable, right? It also made an interesting point that splits the country into three parts: Southern England, as they call it, which actually includes the East, the Southeast, ex-London, and the Southwest. 30% above the average UK house price on average, suffered quite badly over the last 12 months, fallen in bigger numbers in terms of percentages. London, which has done okay, which they posit, which I tend to agree with, is on the back of the fact that London's been pretty flat since 2016, where it had a big bull run up to 2016, but then it's been relatively flat. I also pointed out that London had grown in capital growth lower than any other region during the pandemic dividend, or whatever you want to call it, in the property market. And then the rest of the UK, which has actually done reasonably well, has grown last year as a general rule, although in very small percentage numbers, where the average house price is 30% below the UK average. So lower price stuff has done better. Stuff that yields has done better. We talked last year about how there'd be an inevitability about, if you can't buy a house at 5% yield with a mortgage because the mortgage rate is 6%, it only makes sense that if you want to invest in property, you're going to have to go further afield. You're going to have to go further up the country, or you're going to have to dump cash into stuff and accept a cash return rather than a leverage return, which is inevitably destroying the point of leverage, which also takes away from a lot of the point of doing property in the first place, in terms of buying and holding it from an investment perspective, unless you've got a large unencumbered portfolio and you're sitting on, you know, significant wealth, of course. But even then, I'd still argue that you'd want to use debt, but that would be a technical argument rather than an argument that would get in the way of anything else. So that's where sort of Zoopla have fallen. Bank of England money report basically says, apart from the mortgage approvals, money supply has trimmed back a little bit. I talked a bit about the money supply in terms of M2. It starts getting very technical, but M2 is a bit simpler than some of the measures the bank prefers to look at, because they start getting obsessed with shadow banking and non-financial institutions and this, that, and the other, for good reason, because they have to regulate the sector and they can't regulate what they can't see. So they get particularly nervy about it. I'm more interested at how much money is there in the economy. And this was an interesting comparison. There's actually 22%, M2 is 22% higher than it was on the 1st of January 2020, right? Which miraculously fits into my narrative of stuff's about 25% more expensive. Houses are a bit less than 25% more expensive. Wages are up about 25%. Energy is still about 40% more expensive, but it's coming back down towards where it needs to be. And then there are some individual outliers, of course, like car insurance is what, 50, 60, 70% more than it used to be. Construction costs in general, from what I hear in terms of the retail market, people having extensions and stuff like that, they're up way more than 25%. You know, they're up 40, 50, 60%. Perhaps because those builders are servicing people who've got more money than they had in 2020. I don't know, who could say, but that number, that 22%, is very, very handily congruent with where inflation has been. So perhaps there is an argument on the monetarist side of the fence that the sting in that money supply tail has come out. But of course, we've got to see what continues to happen to the money supply, of which the Bank of England controls most, but not all, over the coming months and years. But there is a monetarist argument that actually inflation might start to calm down quite a bit. Now, compare that to the USA, and the money supply is up 36% since the 1st of January 2020. And they haven't had as much inflation as we have. You know, their inflation rates have been lower. But also, to track to the US, what they've also had is they went from 6% to 3% in the first half of 2023, basically, in terms of their CPI. Whereas ours was more like the second half of 2023, we went from 8% to 4%. Yeah. And now they've had stubbornness at 3% for the last 8 months. And we've had stubbornness at 4% for the last 3 months. Right. So we might well have another 6 months of stubbornness in or around that 4% mark. And that might be the sting in the tail. Without a crash landing in the economy, that's almost inevitable, really, because things don't come down quickly enough. The outlier is April, when the energy price cap drops again. But my issue is, how are we going to forecast consumption when workers on minimum wage are going to get 10% more in their pockets, or at least 7% more in their pockets, because they'll still be paying tax and national insurance, of course. But will that money be saved? And savings are still quite high at the moment. Or if the country becomes a bit more confident, the taps can go back on in terms of consumer spending. Although, as I said last week, consumer confidence has not been a positive number since January 2016, which is a tragic stat, really, that upset me and made an impression on a few people on my socials that I shared it with. It's a bad state of affairs, really. What else happened? The bond yields didn't have a particularly eventful week, really. We're still at about 4%. The 5-year swap is trading just below the bond yields, which is nice, but also tells you how much demand there still isn't in the mortgage housing market. And as Piotr said, if you wanted to sort of track that to, well, that means that there's more people renting than would otherwise be buying, that would be fair. It's still interesting to note that last year, the percentage of transactions undergone by first-time buyers were as high as they've been for many, many years. There were just so many fewer transactions. So we still need that rate to come back down a bit. And I think that pretty much that's all. There was an interesting piece in the CBI do a sort of more flat state of the retail market, which has been struggling significantly since it had a big bump in sort of 2020 and 2021 as people sold a lot of stuff online. And then that needs that extra money that was in people's pockets. They used to buy their hot tubs or their Pelotons or whatever they bought during COVID to try and live a semblance of a normal life while they were locked down. That heat has come right back out the market. But the expectation was a pretty bad print on the CBI distributive trades, it's called, about -46. And actually it printed -7. So it was it missed the forecast by a million miles, which makes things look a little bit better and a little bit rosier than expected. So it's back to that phrase I've been using the last few weeks. It's cautious optimism or trending towards cautious optimism. But the COVID damage, if you like, the COVID distortion of all of the markets that we've tended to deal in is obviously still there. And we're coming back like the mortgage approvals, going back to those, we're coming back from historically a pretty low period that looks something like sort of 2010 looked like, as we were still sweeping up the pieces of the great financial crisis. And just on that front, I can also share with the audience that as a proud dad moment last night, as I watched The Big Short for the first time with my eldest son, which was extremely enjoyable, because he was asking me some pertinent questions, which made me just revise just how well I understand all the slightly technically complex bits in The Big Short. But he enjoyed it, and I gave him a choice of. I didn't indoctrinate him. I gave him a choice of 3 movies that were completely different, and he plumped for The Big Short. So proud dad day today.
What were the other 2 movies?
So interestingly, and I mean completely different. The one was Berry Gordy's The Last Dragon. I don't know if you've ever seen it or heard of it. There was going to be a Samuel L. Jackson, it's a bit of a cult film. There was going to be a Samuel L. Jackson inspired remake. If anybody has seen it, Samuel L. was going to play the Shogun of Harlem. So it's like a kung fu movie spoof with Motown backing as a general rule. 1985, and my goodness, you can tell that it's 1985. Phenomenal for really cheesy, like completely off the wall choice, really. And the other one was Jerry Maguire, because I think it would be time for him to watch Jerry Maguire, my agent. It's time. It's time for Show Me the Money. I'll slot in a third choice to replace The Big Short when I might slot in Dumb Money, actually, because I haven't seen it. And then when I was on a plane a couple of weeks back, I did watch it, and what a fantastic film that is as well. What a fabulous explanation of how the whole GameStop and the Reddit and the subreddits and all of that. That's a hell of a move. In terms of what went on there, you just, like you do in these situations, you just shake your head at the end, because just like you've said it before, Jan, I can't remember how you framed it, but you start with a cause and you end up with a racket, I think, and there's some stuff that goes on in the middle. And that's basically exactly what happened with GameStop,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Have you seen a film came out roughly the same time? It's called Loke Dog, Way of the Samurai. Have you seen that?
I have not. Is that a must watch? Is that a Jay Howard must watch recommendation then?
I mean, if you like that kind of film, the 1985s, I think this was maybe either late 80s or very, very early 90s. And it's a very, very gritty. It's a brilliant film if you're into that kind of mock or mock-esque martial arts. But it was filmed very, very well. The directorship was very good on it.
So I love my film watching around the age of 18 would have been basically RoboCop, Terminator, Commando, that sort of stuff, and then like Steven Seagal movies, Jean-Claude Van Damme, The Muscles from Brussels, that sort of gear. I was all over it at that sort of age. And then when my taste became a little bit more eclectic and I started to appreciate the mockumentary style effects on things, it was The Last Dragon was I love The Last Dragon. There's some good lessons. There's still some good philosophical lessons in The Last Dragon as well. So it's a shame more people haven't seen it. It's a shame they didn't remake it with Samuel L., because then obviously lots more people would be aware of it and it would be one hell of a cool movie. So still needs to happen. Hopefully it'll happen one day. But yeah, awesome film.
Did he run out of questions when Margot Robbie was in the bath, or
it went quiet for a moment, looking at it that way, but yeah. There's some fantastic. There's always, it's such a good film because there's always a bit in there that you didn't notice, that even though I've seen it so many times now, there's one bit, and then you appreciate more and more about Mark Baumer, because he is the truly wonderful character in it, in the way that he just operates in general. Do you know what I mean? He's just brilliant.
Brilliant. Well, out of all the indicators and economic data you showed us and shared with us today, you missed one important new indicator, the unofficial traders market indicator.
Okay, tell us about it.
Yeah, we've been having conversations with Safe, and he was sharing how all the traders currently are struggling to get stock, even at 85%. At like 80% is really difficult. 75% is very unheard of. And 85%
That's interesting, you know,
seems to
because
be below
weird.
standard.
That's weird because we're not struggling to pick up. We've picked up more deals in the last 2 months than we have for a long time, and that's the sort of level
Amazing.
we're pitching at 70. Generally
Wow.
speaking, 70
Where
to
did you pick
75.
it up from?
Generally open market or intercepting before it's going to open market. So from the people who are updating their view of the market more slowly than you or I would be.
Mhm.
That's interesting. What do you think's driving that difficulty in picking up even at 85% then? Level of is the competition so strong, or what's the drive? What's the economic driver behind that?
Well, I think it's the desire of people to actually get rid of the properties at a given price. Plus, there's quite a lot of competition in the traders market. Like, people seem to want to trade, and that seems to be the issue. And market is a little bit unpredictable. So 1 month auctions can be really good. The other month auctions can be really bad. So people find it really difficult to price things.
So have we seen variability throughout February in terms of the outcome? I mean, I know that we have, because we picked up a couple of things post auction that we shouldn't really have been able to pick up. Now, of course, one man, and I see this all. You see, the trader stock that I see, apart from the stock that I buy from traders, is because generally I'm not following it through the auction. So I'm seeing the scraps behind where the traders made a mistake. This happens to me all the time, and I say, well, if I speak to the auction house, or one of the guys speaks to the auction house and says, listen, John, let's call him John. I don't know any traders called John. John's made a mistake on this one, right? And John needs to accept that he's made a mistake and he's not getting his money back. We had a couple that we looked at. There's one that went unsold in the SDL auction on Thursday, bought by quite a big trading company who you guys will know. And they've just paid 10 grand too much for it in the first place. And I always look at these things and think, well, I could have told you that was 10 grand too much in the first place. I'm not changing my analysis of that property from whether you've bought it or whether you've tried to sell it or whether you've sold it or whether it's unsold after the auction, you know. And you've just paid 10 grand too much, and now you're expecting someone. And also, of course, inevitably, they're loading it into the auction with 8 grand's worth of fees on the back end. Yeah. And, you know, and they're not really listening to the fact they probably need to take a loss on that one and move it on. But they have this very fixed mind. Some companies have a very fixed mindset around, well, we're not taking any less for it than what we've paid. Well, okay, well, hold on to it for another 3 months then, and then it's going to cost you another £3,000, £4,000, £5,000, and then see what happens.
What's even more annoying than that is when traders refuse to take a couple of grand profit because they think they should have made more money, and they stick.
Oh, so they might pull something that's actually technically sold, you mean, and then just pull some kind of smoke and mirrors activity to keep it in the next auction or whatever.
So annoying.
I think in the last 2 months, I've had 3 conversations with 3 separate traders. One person who was absolutely certain they bought a stunning deal, and probably on £1 per square foot they did. But the problem is the area is a slow transacting area, and there's a couple of complications with it and things like that. So auction was probably not the right route, but they had an offer. The offer was basically a little bit more than what they paid for it, but not covering any of their transactional fees. And I said, take the money. Otherwise, you're going to have to go into like a proper mortgage. You're going to have to refurb it. You're going to have to rent it. You're going to have to hold it. You're not going to get all your money out from where you are. It's an aggravation. Take the 5-10 grand loss, regroup, go again, make your money. Because obviously, like, rule number 1 is get your money back. Rule number 2 is get a return on your money. But rule number 3 is, if rule number 2 doesn't work, get out with as minimal loss as you possibly can.
As fast as you can. As fast as you can. Yeah.
And rule number 4 is don't throw good money after bad.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how you can purport to be a trader if you can't understand that, because a trader who can't take a loss is not a trader. It's a sunny day gambler who only expects things to.
I use that exact terminology with 3 different people.
I think those rules would make a really good PDF ebook download thingy.
Great. Let me write those down again before I forget them.
Okay, I was definitely Jay's Four Pillars. This is Jay's Four Pillars live on air. Fantastic. But yeah, it's so true. So that's interesting. That's interesting because I'm surprised. Has the February auction market sort of behaved as you generally thought it would, or is it kind of like I was saying, it's been pretty variable and there's been a bit of all sorts, or what's been the drill?
From week to week since the start of the year, it's been a complete roller coaster.
Right.
It's been up and down. It's difficult to call it.
Would that track back to a 2019 style market, do you think, in terms of what I was saying earlier? Is that what 2019 auctions were like?
Pre-COVID, February auctions were always hot. If you were selling and you had something to sell and you thought, I don't want to sell in December, you'd skip January because hardly any auctioneers would run one in January, and you'd be selling in February, and you'd be hard pushed not to be selling well.
Do you think there's more pressure on the traders with less stock? I know that a couple of guys, without dropping loads of names and stuff like that, there's a lot more understanding of shortening the time frame these days, which is absolutely the way to push your IRR up if you can make a profit. But do you think that also that side of things, I mean, let's face it, if every trader shortened their time frame by 25%, they'd need 25% more stock in order to compensate for the fact that we're selling it 25% quicker. So do you think there's any time pressure? Or it does seem to me that I see more lots which have a shorter time frame to completion, which doesn't bother me. In fact, I like it because I think that's going to put quite a few people off if they bother to read the legal pack, which of course, in many ways, if it was law that you had to read the legal pack and answer 10 questions on it, auction would be so much more lucrative for me. I would love that, but obviously it doesn't work. It absolutely doesn't work like that. But do you think there's a time compression thing going on?
So some of the larger cash buyers, what we would call traders, they try and move their money in 90-day cycles. So whatever they bought, they want that money back within 90 days. And if you're talking to a buy-to-let investor or a developer, a 90-day return is stupid. Most of them would never even imagine receiving a 90-day return, right? So that shows just how quick traders are. And that's from the 90-day return can come from before they exchange, when they start kind of pumping out costs, surveys and things like that. And the big traders that I know that do that is them fighting against the wave. They really want to be getting their money back within, 8 weeks. And trading at auction helps that. And I think one of the things that you're seeing with the shorter completion points is traders trying to back-to-back marry up their completions, because if they can marry up the completions, they don't have to wait, an extra 4 to 6 weeks on the back end to get their cash back out. Now, if they're doing that with, 10% of their stock that they're trying to back-to-back, that will bring the overall average down for the 90 days to maybe an extra week or 10 days, but who knows?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because to Piotr's point, in terms of sharing, that some traders are struggling to even get stuff at 85%. The problem really for the trader is ultimately they can take a smaller margin as long as the next car is driving onto the lot pretty quickly, right? But if the next car is difficult, you then end up having to do the opposite and stretch out the time, maximize every deal, where you do have to refurb it and go through the pain of an open market sale and all the rest of it, because you haven't necessarily got the next gap to plug as things slow down, which is one of the reasons why it's really, really quite hard to run. Look, property trading is, I think, in terms of all of the skills that there are within property, trading sits right at the top, realistically. Now, there are some people who are naturally engineered to be good traders, that similarly they'd be great traders of any other business that they went into. The commodity's just different here. So that's just one more level of complexity, where, from what you've said about February, it must feel like you're changing tactics month to month at the moment, which is pretty stressful, apart from anything else.
But they're able to do that because of the time that they've been in the deal. Buy-to-let investor, or someone who's been repossessed, or a probate, or someone who's looking to sell a deal that's not producing the right kind of return to get a bigger deal that is producing the right kind of return. they're missing the market. And you would find at the moment, the majority of the people who are struggling to, accept offers at 70, 80% of market value are those that probably bought up in 2020, 2021, 2022, and they're over leveraged. They can't.
Yeah, so they just can't take it without putting money in, basically. Yeah. But
So,
similarly, they don't want to take the loss that we were talking about the trader not taking. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But I mean, there's one trade, well, more than one, but the trader that I'm thinking of must trade 500 or 600 properties a year. Absolute beast. And he doesn't really care what it sells for. He's a volume trader.
So he's seeing it as he's done his job, putting it. He found the right place to put it. He found the right way to buy it. What happens is what happens, and I'm going to ignore the outcome because I know on average. Well, that's a fantastic attitude to take, isn't it? Because then you don't sweat that stuff. You don't waste your time worrying about the result invariant side of it. You know you've got an edge. You know you're working that edge, and you also appreciate that. I mean, what's the realistic differential on the day with an auction property? One single property. 10% or 15% over, or 10% or 15%. I mean, it's huge, isn't it? Huge.
Yeah.
So therefore, ride the lightning. And with the beauty of volume is the law of large numbers works in your favour. So do you know what? Over the course of a month and certainly a year, you'll get lucky and you'll get unlucky. Get over it. Count the money at the end of that. Tell you how good you are. Ultimately,
yeah. I mean. Fortunately, he's pretty good where it doesn't need to be a 51-49. He doesn't need to be winning 51% of the time to be winning. For him, he could break even on 50% of the stock he runs. He can make money on 30%. He can lose on 20%, but he's still up. So it's about managing those proportions. And the stuff that he thinks he's going to lose big on, he just portfolios. So he's lucky to be able to do that. And a lot of traders don't portfolio too soon. There's different issues that you can encounter along the way. But impressive
and
stuff.
One of the things that we talked about about the auction market is like things in generally a bit more positive, like what you said. It's like it feels more positive than negative, and also like going forward. And I think that's what drives a lot of people to want to trade, and being a landlord isn't very sexy nowadays, so people like to trade. Trading became a bit more of a thing.
How could but you're quite right. I mean, look, trading like development is the bit that everybody, it sounds great, it's actually on both of those fronts. If I say trading is the hardest, development is the next hardest, and it's not a lot less hard than trading.
I think it's harder because it's prolonged over a long period of time where a lot of things can go wrong. In trading,
you're exposed to more quickly. Yeah, you're exposed to more time risk. Whereas imagine some of those 2-year cycle. If you're saying a developer might work on a 2-year cycle, let's say, some of those 2-year cycles over the past 4 years have been immeasurably ridiculous in terms of what's happened within those 2-year cycles. And of course, in reality, some people have got really lucky. If you'd built stuff at 2020 prices that you were selling in the 2021 market, you had it right off, didn't you? Do you know what I mean? Whereas if you were agreeing stuff in 2019 that didn't then get into building until early 2021, and then you had to sell it in late 2022, ouch, total ouch. So there's more risk. This is what a lot of people don't understand about the value of time. This is like lease options, right? If you sign a 10-year option, there's about 50 million things that can go wrong, right? I'm not saying don't do it, but I am saying consider whether you should exchange on that property rather than signing a 10-year lease option, because a decent percentage of people will go bankrupt, leave the country, die, all those other sorts of things that might get divorced. There's so much probability of exposing yourself to risk and I'm hearing about this is the time when the stories that I'm hearing are options unwinding. Why are they unwinding? In reality, because all they did was they borrowed a very low rate mortgage from the vendor, base plus 2 or whatever. So they were paying 2.5 throughout from 2009 to 2020. And then they were paying 2.1 when base went down to 0.1. And now they're paying 7.25. They're interested and they're off out the way. And what they've done is the same as what landlords do. They've got fat off the proceeds of the option. They haven't put the money back into the deal. They haven't invested the money. They've seen it as lifestyle money, and now it's gone. And so a lot of these option relationships are falling apart, especially if you have people who are middlemen or middle women sitting in the middle of transactions who were taking the fat out of it. Very similar to these social housing loan investment deals that are going to go horribly wrong at some point in the relatively near future.
Yeah, and one last thing to also watch out for is the price of Bitcoin and the amount of properties sold in the auction to accidental buyers or people who don't know much about property but just want to spend the profits on real assets.
So that's an interesting one, because I remember hearing when we went to the moon last time, there were a few anecdotal stories I heard of people who'd made tens of millions, and all they were doing was liquidating their position and going into hard assets like property. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a really, really interesting point, because the volume of that, I still look at Bitcoin with wonderment and think like, okay, so when's the real world application really coming from? I mean, specifically from Bitcoin, not from crypto, you know, a broader understanding of the blockchain and things that it will do for society. But when am I going to the shop to buy something in Bitcoin? Let me know when that's happening, you know. And if I do, if I leave the house and it's a 20-minute walk to the shop, what if it's gone down 8% and I get there and I can't afford it? So there's still that level of volatility that is not a usable currency, isn't there? And I'm not saying it can't, you know, everyone's out the woodwork now saying, oh, it'll be 100K by the end of the year. Oh, no, it'll be more. But it's like, but the trouble is, it's still castles in the sky, isn't it? And it's still like, well, we better buy some before somebody else buys some. And then tomorrow it's going to be higher. And then tomorrow, and it's like, this is, you know, South Sea bubble. Go back and study 450 years worth of bubbles, and then come back to me and we'll have a chat about it. You know,
it's an enigma, because the value range is £17,500 to £67,000 a Bitcoin. That just seems to be it kind of bottoms here and it tops here. So, and that's a big spread for you to kind of figure out whether you can afford a Domino's at the end of the day and pay by Bitcoin. It's a
Was it 10,000 Bitcoin
you mean
for
buying
2 pizzas?
All of the Domino's pizzas chain, or
the whole master franchise?
You're talking to me and Adam here. We can sink 17 grand's worth of pizzas, okay?
Yeah, was it 2011 when there were 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas? It was a bit of a publicity stunt or whatever.
The guy trade. Yeah.
So that's like, what's that now? 600 mil or something? 600 mil for 2 pizzas. It's pretty painful, isn't it? Really. They better be good pizzas.
Oh, amazing.
Do we have any commenters? I know hopefully Helen's going to join us in a little bit to something that she wanted to talk about, but I don't know if she is going to make it. And if she's not, maybe we can. Oh, what a Dominic, take a bow. Father of the year, Dominic Ormondroyd. Take a bow.
Yes.
I'm not. As long as Wolf of Wall Street was watched within the context of probably don't want to do it quite this way. This is maybe an ethical dilemma or two in the Wolf of Wall Street. You know.
One to watch is also Margin Call. Have you seen Margin Call? I think it's Kevin.
Do you know what? I have seen Margin Call, and I was summarily disappointed. And so many people keep saying how good they thought it was. I've got to watch it again, but I really didn't enjoy it at all. I thought it was rubbish, and I've got to go back in and have another go at it. Got to go back in and have another go at it.
I think the only thing I liked about it was that it was a look at the conversations that were happening at like board level when, like, moments before the shit hit the fan. You know, I don't think it really did a great deal of, you know, it wasn't as entertaining, obviously, as The Big Short or The Wolf of Wall Street, but it was kind of like it was a peek behind the curtain. And I found that very interesting. Well, I think
have you seen Too Big to Fail, the documentary? The bit I'll never forget in Too Big to Fail is when he's interviewing one of the ex-Lehman executives, and he says, so how many planes did you have? And the Lehman guy goes, including the 747? So, and he's like, yeah, including the 747. And it's like, I mean, what a joke. And he's like, I don't know, like 20 or something like that. It's like, gee, I mean, come on. I mean, you just can't conceptualize that world unless you've moved in it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to Ghost Dog: The Way of the Samurai, though, to be honest with you. So that's coming onto the list next time for sure.
There is one scene in it, Adam, that you're going to look at and go, "This is so ridiculous, it's brilliant." I fully expect feedback on that one scene. You'll know it as soon as you see it.
Brilliant.
well, I only watched The Big Shot twice, or maybe 3 times. But what I watched a couple of times, it's almost the full series of Suits, like all 8 seasons. That's a good one. There's
I've
a lot
not
of
put the time into Suits, and I know that I definitely should do by the sounds of it, because
if you start, it's gonna last.
okay.
It's
Okay,
gonna
I'm gonna get
replace you
stuck into
later
it
in the background.
I did up to season 4, and then the pattern of the episodes is so repetitive. I got bored. It's kind of like, oh look, we need someone who has a fantastic memory, and we need an arsehole with a really good dress sense, and we need someone else who looks a bit like a rat, and then everything gets fixed, and then it's the same episode again. Just a
Oh, I'd
different
say
scenario.
not everyone's got 3 degrees and can recognize those patterns so quickly.
I was going to say it sounds like the way we've done the casting for this podcast, actually, guys. To be honest with you, so fair enough. Just not sure who's who at the moment. That's all.
Okay, I don't think I'm the one with a good dress sense. I think that's somebody else.
Definitely not. It's definitely not me, Chief. So someone, maybe that's Helen. Oh, have we?
Graham is asking if we have seen Gypsy Billionaire.
I haven't, and I'll put that down for a watch. I've not even heard of it, to be honest.
No, neither have I. Gypsy Billionaire.
I tell you what, I did.
It's about Alfie Best, right? Okay, yeah. Oh, it's got Terry Stone in. Oh, that'll be good. Yeah, I'll enjoy that.
There you go.
Oh.
I'll tell you what I watched recently, which is a bit of a guilty pleasure of mine to watch. I watched The Devil's Advocate.
Okay.
It's a film.
I remember it. I've seen it. I'm just. Is it the one with? Who's it got in it? Yeah, I was going to say, is it Keanu? Right. Yeah.
Keanu Reeves. Yeah.
Pacino. Yeah.
Pacino.
Yeah.
It's if you haven't seen it, Piotr, it's I know it's a little bit too sci-fi for you, I think.
On the subject of Suits, the Firm is a must watch in those situations, because The Firm tells you it's probably, I think, one of the more underrated, unspoken of Tom Cruise movies as a general rule. But I loved it.
What is it?
The Firm, yeah. Well, it's similar sort of. Once you work for the firm owns you. It's as simple as, and they own you. Oh yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's good. It's good stuff. It's good stuff.
Wow, that's quite a recommendation. At least for a couple of weekends.
Yeah, that'll sort a bit of viewing out, isn't it?
I think the viewership of the Sunday special might go down after this list.
I think because they're watching other stuff that's better. You mean, yeah. Oh, here is Helen. Brilliant.
Helen.
Better late than never, huh?
Hey.
Go. Sorry, I'm actually on a yoga.
I thought you were going to say you're on a boat then or something, because it was just moving up and down this.
No, that's me wobbly. I'm on a yoga course, and so my time is not my own. But at least I got to see you today, so I can join you for 10 minutes.
Well, we were just about to start talking about what was from that LinkedIn post the other day, actually, but we can just hand over to you to bring everybody up to speed.
Oh, the identity one. Oh, yeah, that was good. Got lots of comments on that. God, I'm having a mind blank though at the moment. Where was I going with it? Oh, it was about, yeah. So my friend tagged me in a post, and it made me cringe because she got a clip. She'd obviously Googled me. Googled me on Google, and it came up as Helen Chorley, TV personality, and I was like, oh my God, like, haven't I done so many other things in my life that I'm known for other than like being on TV? Yes, I've been on TV, but that came because of other things that I've done. And I had a real I'm not sure how I feel about this. So I wrote a post about it, and then we got into all types of discussions about identity and do you describe yourself as a mother, a wife? Kind of like a lot of women tend to define themselves by connections first. A lot of us, certainly me when I was in banking, defined myself by a job role primarily, and then but what happens when that goes away? Because that takes part of your identity, but does it really? Who are you really? So that opened up a whole different discussion. You put a great comment on there, Adam, and said, let's tap into that today.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I think it also, you can go a long way with this. We've only got 10 minutes left, but, identity, it makes you think of identity politics. It makes you think of how many people identify themselves by a cause. And then it makes you think about how often that cause is a distraction, really, from the true and proper causes that there should be in society. And I'm 30 seconds from full Peterson here, realistically. But ultimately, there is that. This is where the whole clean your room comes from, right? When, I was somewhere the other day and one person said, do you know what? All these people who say from the river to the sea, which is obviously extremely controversial, they don't know which river and they don't know which sea. And then someone was there who then was happy to admit they'd been on a march for Palestine, right? And they didn't know which river and which sea either, which was kind of, and I was surprised and disappointed, to say the least, to hear it. But again, that whole thing has just been a purely identity driven. And actually the identity behind that one was, I'm Irish and therefore I identify with this stuff. And therefore I don't question it. I'm just doing it. Not that I'm saying all Irish people do that, because obviously they don't. But this particular person was putting their Irishness at the front as the reason, which also, in their mind, was giving them a bit of excuse for being ignorant about the whole thing, which to me is fundamentally unacceptable. So identity can take over in the wrong ways, can't it? Yeah. Apart from anything else. But I guess the $1 million question, Helen, is what would you have liked to have seen there instead of TV personality?
Oh, that is a good question. Legend. No.
Yoga student.
Yeah.
Sunday special property
Star.
chat panelist.
That's the right answer. That's the right answer.
There is so many like different things that could have been there, and I think it's like one of the conversations got into when you're quite, I guess, have diversified interests and things that you do you niche yourself down, as we're told, kind of like in like Daniel Priestley and kind of like his KPI stuff? Do you niche yourself down and just appeal to that one sector that are going to absolutely love you? What is it, inch wide, mile deep? Or do you honor that whole breadth of who you are, but then maybe you're not appealing, you're not reaching, kind of your avatar, your ideal client, or whoever market, whoever you're trying to reach?
I remember hearing a really good analogy about this, and what was used actually was the medium of football, because the point was, David Beckham was never necessarily the most talented footballer by any stretch of the imagination, but like Johnny Wilkinson of the time, two athletes of the time in the two probably biggest sports in the UK, practiced a hell of a lot striking a dead ball, and so he could kick a free kick at the time as one of the very, very best in the world. So he'd niched into doing that, and then he was a pretty good crosser of the ball, because he'd have to do that while he was moving and stuff like that. But then these days, the analogy was then like, well, what about Ronaldo and what about Messi and which bits they're good at? And the point is, even if you're not the best, you could either be the best dead ball striker in the world, right? Or you could be the 500th best header of a football, the 50th fastest, right? The 200th best passer of the ball in situations. But when you put them together, you become a more complete footballer who can endure beyond. And so there's the answer, like so often, I think probably, is that you blend a couple of things. So if you become the top person at property development, but then you niche that down into, so you're pretty good at raising finance, you're reasonably good at finding opportunities, you're great with people, and your organisation skills are in the top 20% of the population, that might be the makeup of the greatest property developer that's out there, rather than I'm the best fundraiser of all, or I'm the person who gets the best deals, if you're in that box, you're almost certainly going to need to work in some kind of partnership, because you're a one-trick pony to an extent, you know. And so there's got to be, Elon Musk calls it expert generalism, but that's typical Musk, do you know what I mean? But he kind of says, I'm just going to do both of those and be an absolute expert in 17 different fields, and I'm just going to work at it until I'm an expert in those fields. And a lot of the sort of health conscious, self-help, personal development, wealthy American podcasters are going down this route these days, where they will, you know, the amount of thought and time they put into work and learning is incredible, and the amount of creating the right environment for learning that they do is just has reached a totally new level, in my opinion. Which then has, you're then feeding into, interestingly enough, why you might be on a yoga retreat or whatever, because the physical side of things and the mental side of things that offers is going to be helpful for performance apart from anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you Googled yourself, chaps, and what would you like
I've just
to say?
Googled myself, and it says nothing at all. But what I did find out in the background is that there's an Adam Lawrence with an Instagram account that's Adam_is_magnificent, and it's not me.
Oh,
It's not me. But I have got more followers. I've got more followers than him, so yeah. So maybe he can get. He needs to give me that account, I think, really. Yeah. But I have no tagline yet, Helen, I'm afraid. So I'm not there.
When I Google my stuff, there's a lot of my stuff, LinkedIn's and stuff coming up. But there's also another Piotr Rusinek who's in Poland, and he's like a high up director in BNP Paribas real estate.
There was an Adam Lawrence who's the chief exec of the Royal Mint, and now when I Google Adam Lawrence on its own, there's an actor, writer, producer from the West Midlands who's more than 10 years younger than me, far better looking than me, and obviously more accomplished than me. So that's quite depressing. So there you go.
Oh, wow.
He even comes from. There you go.
But is that Adam G. Lawrence or just Adam Lawrence?
That's just Adam Lawrence. Adam G. Lawrence does generally bring up my stuff, but there's no Adam G. Lawrence is a gobshite, whatever. There's none of that there, unfortunately. So, mostly
self-confessed gobshite.
I'll take that as a tagline.
What about you, Jay? Does yours come up as handsome / what was it? What's your pronoun?
Handsome, brilliant. Handsome,
brilliant. Surely that's the only thing you need to be known as.
The Jay Howard that comes up is a British professional race car driver for the Indy 500.
And there's some questions that come up. Is John Howard?
He's a good-looking lad, actually. He's got a full head of hair. It doesn't make me despise him at all. But no, everything that comes up on my searches is a racing car driver that has luscious blonde hair. Bastard. Okay, I don't want to play this game anymore.
But you have an Abarth of Jay. You're almost like a race driver.
Yes. Yeah, almost.
Until you sell that car.
Piotr spent the last 2 weeks convincing people to buy my car because he doesn't like it.
Oh.
I like it. It's just
branded
impractical.
one.
No, the branded one he likes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Piotr really is your wife, isn't he? Bless him. I'm telling you what you can drive. Bless. Actually, I wanted to. Can I ask the people watching a favour? Because the other thing I have to do when I finish my retreat today is write an article for Property Investor News for this month. Obviously, March is very well known because we have International Women's Day on the 8th of March, and I want to touch on something in there because of stuff that I've been doing recently with the she word. I've got lots of exciting things to tell you about that. We'll go much more into that next week. But this article, I want to be about the whole strapline of the She Word podcast is conversations that women rarely have, but really should. And I'd like to know, would love some feedback and suggestions on this, is what are those conversations that women or men, very open to either, rarely have but really should in property? What are the things we're not discussing. And I think that's kind of our subconscious kind of agenda by these Sunday chats as well. You know, we like to shine lights on things that maybe we agree, disagree with, but bring a broader conversation around some of the things that's going on, or some of the initiatives, or some of the strategies, or some of the run back to the room and enter the seven type stuff. So what are those other things? What are those other conversations that people would think we need to have more of? What are taboos that we're still not talking about that we really should? I would love people's feedback on that, please. And can you do it today? Because I've got to get the article to Richard by tomorrow night. So you can do it tomorrow too.
Oh, amazing. It's a good question.
I don't think anyone talks about their mental health. That's still seen as a bit of a taboo, like a weakness. And I think that probably applies whether you're male, female, a tree frog. It doesn't matter. I think everyone. It's something that no one really wants to talk about, and it's probably something as a society we should be more open to talking about.
Yeah,
that's a big one. I think.
I think women begin to talk about stuff like that in, obviously, my other pet subject, menopause, when we get the brain fog and your brain just isn't firing on as all cylinders as it was, not as much as it was before. Hence trying all weird and wonderful things like hyperbaric oxygen chambers, like I do once a week, and coming on yoga retreats and this type of stuff. So I think that's a really good point. Thank you. I shall incorporate your feedback. What about you, Piotr?
I don't want to talk about this.
Whether you like it or not, you always get an honest response from Piotr.
We love it. We love it. That's why we love him. Be more Polish. Still one of my favourite phrases.
I don't know. There's so many things, but I think it's all about being in the right environment. Because I think I talk about pretty much everything, but there needs to be a right environment for it.
Really good
so
point.
Sometimes certain topics we just don't discuss on the Sunday special with certain people, just because the context for those relationships is different. So I really kind of find it difficult to see what kind of conversation we don't really talk about, and what kind of environments we don't have, so that we don't talk about certain things.
That's a really good point. Context. Yeah. You're not going to go into
I'm not really useful with this conversation.
No, it is really useful, but I don't know. We've even kind of pushed the boundaries there, haven't we? Like when it was World Menopause Day, and we had the lovely Adele on, and kind of like commandeered this whole Sunday morning chat with her. It's not the usual topic for the usual audience, but we got such great feedback, and Adam still says like she was one of his favorite guests. So
she's brilliant.
So I think context is a really great point, and then sometimes just pushing those boundaries a little bit is okay. Sometimes gently too.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think it's also good to kind of figure out, depending on what you're saying to somebody, what their intentions are, because I think it's difficult and I think Piotr's point on context is really good, because you may be speaking to somebody who you have a certain relationship with, and you're discussing one thing, but that thing, or they're going to have motivations around you going in one direction rather than the other. So it's a case of being able to talk to people where, like safe space, the people that you're talking to they can't get any benefit out of it, pushing you one way or the other. Because I think a lot of the conversations that you can have with people is that they're going to have their own motivations, their own desires out of it. So sometimes, even if they don't mean to, they could be giving you advice that is contrary to your best.
Yeah.
So I think that's important as well, because let's say you are a good communicator and you do have a healthy network of friends, family, this, that, and the other. It doesn't mean that just because you have that there aren't motivations at play.
Very true. Very true. Again, that's just a different aspect of context, isn't it? Really. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Cool. Okay. Well, anyone watching this, if you could put in the comments what
Yes,
kind of
please.
conversation we're not having and we should be having.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
yes, as men, as women, as property people,
Yeah.
as whoever. Brilliant. Okay, Helen,
you.
that was a brilliant appearance in the last 20
Short and
minutes.
sweet. I'm glad I got
Yeah.
to see you guys.
You came
You're
in
my
like a
highlight of-
joker. Joker, like saving the show. Amazing.
You're my highlight of Sunday.
Hey.
Brilliant. Okay, well, enjoy the rest of your yoga
I will. Go
course
back to chill.
workshop. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching, commenting, and we will see you all next week.
Lovely weekend, everybody.
Have a good week.